Welcome back to Hardball. President Obama is facing mounting political pressure up in New York to reverse course on his decision to try 9/11 mastermind KSM, he's called, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, in federal court in downtown New York City. 6 senators have called on the Attorney General to try the al-Qaeda terrorist in a military commission. And on Wednesday, New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg backtracked on his support, which he gave earlier, for trying him in downtown New York, and suggested instead that the trial take place on a military base. Let's watch.
The federal government could find a site that didn't cost $1 billion, which using downtown will, and it will also impact traffic and commerce and people's lifestyles downtown, and it would be great if we didn't do it.
Lifestyles downtown. Pat Buchanan's an MSNBC political analyst, a little more hard-nosed fellow than worried about lifestyles. And Julie Menon is the chairwoman of the Community Board 1 in Manhattan. She's been pushing for the trial to be held on Governor's Island. You don't like the location, Julie. You don't like it being at Foley Square in downtown New York, right near 9/11. Why not?
Well, that's absolutely right, Chris. It makes no sense whatsoever to have this trial in Lower Manhattan. We're the 4th largest commercial business district in the country. It's the financial capital of the country. It's the only neighborhood that's been attacked twice by terrorists. Why on earth would we have this trial here? And why would we spend $1 billion to hold this trial here? We've got to remember that 9/11 caused $83 billion of economic damage to New York City. So why would we go down that road again? It makes no sense, and we're demanding that the trial be moved.
And you want it moved over to Governor's Island across the river, right?
Well, Governor's Island is one idea. The mayor had some issues about that, so earlier in the week I proposed military installations, specifically military installations within the Southern District of New York, like Stewart Air Base and West Point. And I'm asking Attorney General Holder to look at them. The military bases would be a political compromise between those Republicans that want a military tribunal and those Democrats that want a federal court trial.
Pat, your thoughts about a trial and all the cartoonish aspect of it that I think is coming.
Well, I think that's coming. Well, clearly, I think they're going to have to get it out of Lower Manhattan. When Bloomberg says that, I'm sure Harold Ford and Gillibrand will be in on this. Peter King already is.
And their point of view will be, not in my backyard.
Get it out of New York City, first and foremost. But secondly, the president's got a serious problem, and so does Holder, because of the aspect of this trial, which is going to be turned into a circus by a good defense attorney.
Right.
I mean, the Miranda rights of this guy have been trampled upon as nobody else has had in the history of the world. 183 times he was waterboarded. They said, we're going to kill your family if you don't talk. And this guy comes, and then you bring in John McCain and you ask him, you said waterboarding is torture. Was my client tortured? Senator?
Yeah.
Your client says, yes, he was.
Joey Menon, that's a larger issue. Can you try this guy in court and win?
Absolutely. We should have the venue as a federal courts. We've got to remember that in Bush administration, we had hundreds of terrorists prosecuted in the federal court systems. How many did we have in the military tribunals? 2. And both of those had to be actually switched over to the federal court system precisely because government lawyers in the Bush administration were concerned that the Supreme Court would rule parts of those trials unconstitutional. I want to see KSM prosecuted, and the best venue to do so is in the federal court system. And the idea that I'm proposing, which the mayor backs, is military installations but hold a federal court trial there. A federal judge could preside over it, and you give the imprimatur of a military trial to it.
Well, wouldn't you still have the problem? You'd have to impanel a New York City jury from Manhattan District, right? Wouldn't you have to find local people? And could you find a jury of 12 people plus alternates where you could be pretty sure they weren't up to something, that they weren't going in that jury with the purpose of maybe writing a book, of offering a weird verdict like innocent?
I will tell you, Chris, I absolutely think so. As a former regulatory attorney, I really think that you're going to get an impartial jury, and you can get an impartial jury in New York. 9/11 affected everyone in the United States, so I don't buy the argument that you can't have New Yorkers as jurors in this trial.
Well, the trouble with some of these, first, Mrs. Surratt was tried at Fort McNair and hanged at Fort McNair.
Who was Mrs. Surratt? I'm sorry.
She was in on the Lincoln assassination, or said to be in on the Lincoln assassination. They had a military tribunal down there, tried him and hung him right there at the fort. But look, Chris, they don't realize American trials, civil trials, are part game. You get these dream team attorneys on one side, the reporters go in, prosecution had some good points today, defense, they'll be out after it's over, standing there, the attorneys will, in front of those cameras, and if Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is smart, he will get someone to argue the case of the Islamic terrorist protests, what's been done to the Palestinians, what's been done to the Iraqis, what the Americans have done. Put the United States on trial and get a lawyer in there to do it, and that'll be a disaster for Barack Obama and for this country.
But Pat, you already had that with KSM and the military tribunal. You've got to remember, at the end of the Bush administration, they put him in a military tribunal, and he spewed all of his rhetoric, and media was there, and they reported on it. So you still have that kind of circus-like atmosphere, whether it's in a military tribunal or in a federal court of law. My question to you, Pat, is why is it that Republicans are now up in arms over this? Where were they in terms of the hundreds of terrorists who were prosecuted in the federal court system, like Richard Reed?
Julie, at that point, let's hear what Senator-elect Scott Brown had to say in his victory speech to know what's changed in the atmosphere. Here he is. Let's listen.
I believe, and I know all of you believe, that our Constitution and laws exist to protect this nation. They do not grant rights and privileges to enemies in wartime. In dealing with terrorists, our tax dollars should pay for weapons to stop them and not lawyers to defend them.
Joey, your response to Senator-elect Scott
First of all, I want to see KSM brought to justice. And if we followed the senator's logic, I don't think he'd be brought to justice under the military tribunal, because I think the Supreme Court is going to knock down certain parts of it. We've got to remember that hearsay is admissible in a military tribunal. Hearsay is not admissible in a federal court of law. Why would we take that risk and go down that road?
Let's take a look at what the president said last night.
Let me talk about the absurdity of this, Chris. Look, this Reed, the shoe bomber, he should have been taken off the plane, interrogated. Who gave you this idea? Who made these shoes for you? Did they give you some other ideas on how to bring bombs in? Where did you learn this? We want information to save lives.
I agree.
I don't care what happens to Richard Reed. I don't care what happens to the underwear bomber. You know, after 12 hours, they said you can get a lawyer, and he shut up completely. We want information to save lives and win and end a war.
Here's Dianne Feinstein, one of the most level-headed senators I think there is. Senator Dianne Feinstein is a member of the Intelligence, I think she's chair of the Intelligence Committee. Here's what she said about the trial today. Let's listen to Senator Feinstein.
I think the dynamic has changed now, and I think that the administration ought to listen to the mayor, listen to the mayor's concern, and candidly make a change. There is nothing wrong with making a change. The administration has flexibility. It can try somebody in Article 3 court, decide to do it, change its mind, put that individual into a military commission. So the administration has total control of this. And I think the situation has changed.
Julie, I often look to Senator Feinstein for sort of the true north in American politics. People think she's a liberal. She's very centrist in her thinking, and I think very mature in her outlook in terms of jurisprudence and all. She's been through hell in her life as an executive in San Francisco and very much involved in the system all these years out there in the court system. She knows what she's talking about. What do you think? She says go back to the military approach. What do you don't agree?
I like my hybrid approach, which is have it in a military installation, but have a federal court judge preside over it. And that is a compromise solution. I get very worried about these military tribunals. I get very worried about whether they're really going to be successful or not. And if our ultimate goal is to bring KSM to justice, shouldn't we do everything possible to reach that goal?
I'm just afraid that a young person could go to law school now and finish by the time this trial is over. That this trial is going to go on and on. We're going to be hearing arguments about waterboarding. And any young, smart, liberal attorney is going to say, how can you say this person is given a fair trial after how many waterboardings?
183.
And that didn't give the prosecution the evidence. And you got the tainted fruit here, whatever it's called. You've got a real problem with this evidence.
Exactly.
It came from torture. So how can you win the case? That's what I keep asking.
Dianne Feinstein also has something else in mind. She is a good, solid Democrat. She sees the terrible problems, A, with having it in downtown New York. Suppose some bomber like that anarchist bomber down at Wall Street blows people up. That's the end of the Obama administration. And secondly, I think she sees the problem of these lawyers coming out and making the case for Al-Qaeda on American television.
I'm afraid Foley Square is going to be the new ground zero because they'll be looking at it. You know they'll be looking at it.
Pat, why don't you support this idea of having the trial on a military military installation. Why can't it be in West Point and have it as a federal court trial?
West Point is a place of honor in America. The symbolism is appalling. Okay, with your Air Force base or something like that, don't use West Point for this, but use a military tribunal on this guy. He's a prisoner of war who engaged in a horrible atrocity against the United States. He needs a Nuremberg tribunal.
But then let me ask
I am closer to Pat on this than you'd believe. Anyway, thank you. It's great to have you on, Joey. Please come back and we'll argue this at length forever, I think, but it's an important argument. Pat Buchanan, it's not just about venue. It's about what kind of a trial, military or civilian.